"I won't be a burden. I'll clean your barn," native woman begged. But Cowboy's reply froze her. The sun had barely started to rise over the wide open plains when Lila stood at the edge of the dusty road, her small bundle of belongings clutched tightly in her hands. She was only 22, but life had already carved deep lines of worry and responsibility into her young face. Her home, once filled with laughter and the warmth of family, had been lost to forces beyond her control. Now the world felt enormous, and she felt incredibly small. Each morning she woke with the question that had become a constant companion. How can I survive without becoming a burden to anyone? Lila's feet ached from the long walk she had taken over the past few days. She had tried everything she could think of, offering to help in kitchens, washing dishes, tending small gardens, but most doors had closed quickly, some with polite refusals, others with cold stares that cut deeper than words ever could. Her pride, however, would not allow her to beg. She had seen too many of her people lose their dignity while relying on others. She wanted to work, to earn her place in the world, no matter how small that place might be. The town she now approached was tiny, barely more than a collection of wooden houses and a single general store. It was surrounded by endless fields, some golden with grain and some brown from the summer's heat. Beyond the town, the hills rose gently into the distance, dotted with patches of forest and the occasional barn. Leela had heard whispers from passing travelers that one of these barns belonged to a man people called the Cowboy. He was known to be quiet and private, keeping to his own land and rarely speaking to anyone who didn't have business there. Some said he was gruff, even cold. Others claimed he had a good heart, though few had seen it. Lila had no choice but to try. Her stomach growled with hunger, and her arms ached from carrying her meager bundle. As she walked down the main street of the town, she kept her head low, noticing every detail around her. The wooden boards of the buildings were worn and creaking, and the windows reflected the early sunlight in sharp, blinding angles. A few people were already moving about, sweeping porches or carrying buckets of water, their faces lined with the same weariness she felt in her own bones. Despite the town's small size, she felt a nervous tension in the air. It wasn't just her own worry. There seemed to be a quiet wariness in everyone she passed. Perhaps it was the isolation, or maybe it was the memory of hard winters and harder lives. Lila tried to ignore it. She had a single purpose now, and she could not afford distractions. When she reached the edge of the town, the field stretched out before her, wide and empty, except for a single barn in the distance. The wood was weathered, the paint faded, but it was solid and strong. Smoke curled from a chimney behind it, suggesting someone was inside. Her heart beat faster. This was it, the Cowboy's barn, the place where she would ask for work, the place where she might find a chance to survive with dignity. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and tried to calm the jumble of thoughts in her mind. "I won't be a burden," she told herself. "I'll do anything.
I'll clean the barn. I'll sweep.
I'll carry the hay. I'll work. I just need a chance." As she approached the barn, the sound of her footsteps on the dry dirt seemed unusually loud. She noticed the careful way the Cowboy had stacked the hay, the neatness of the tools, and the way the barn door swung slightly in the morning breeze. Everything suggested order and discipline. She imagined the man inside, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands rough from work and a face that rarely smiled. She tried to steel herself for whatever response he might give. When she finally reached the door, she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the worn wooden latch, trembling slightly. She had never been in such a position before. asking someone for work without knowing if they would even consider it. But she forced herself to speak. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. I don't mean to trouble you. I was hoping."
I could help. I can clean the barn, or sweep, or...
"Anything you need. I won't be a burden. I just need a chance." There was a pause, and she felt her heart sink. The wind rustled the hay, and somewhere a bird called out as if echoing her anxiety. Then the door creaked open slowly, and the cowboy appeared. His presence was more imposing than she had imagined. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame honed by years of labor. His face was lined, but his eyes were sharp, observing everything with quiet intelligence. "You don't need to work here," he said, his voice deep and calm, but there was no warmth in it, at least not yet. Lila swallowed hard, her throat dry, but she forced herself to nod. "I know," she said quickly, "but I want to. I need to. I can't just sit and wait for help. Please, I'll do anything. Please, let me help." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to read her very soul. Lila could feel herself shrinking under his gaze, but she refused to step back. Pride had always been her anchor, and she would not let fear pull her under now. Finally, he spoke again. "You're brave to come here like this," he said, his tone almost a whisper, though firm. "Most people would turn and walk away. But I don't need help. Not yet. You should know that before you waste your time." Lila's stomach tightened, but she forced a small nod. "I understand. I'm not asking for charity. I can work. I'll do anything. I'll make it worth your time." The cowboy's eyes softened ever so slightly, though his face remained unreadable. He said, turning slightly to gesture toward the barn. "You can start by sweeping the floor. Let's see if you can handle it." Relief and determination flooded Lila at once. She nodded vigorously, fighting back a smile. She set down her bundle and grabbed a broom from the corner. The barn smelled of hay and earth, strong and raw, and the wooden floor was rough under her fingers. As she began to sweep, her muscles aching with the unfamiliar labor, she felt something shift inside her. This was her chance, not just to survive, but to prove to herself that she could face the world with strength and courage. Hours passed, and the cowboy watched silently, occasionally offering a nod or a small instruction. Lila worked tirelessly, moving with a rhythm that grew steadier with each passing moment. She felt her pride return with every sweep of the broom and every pile of hay stacked neatly in the corner. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. By the time the sun had climbed high into the sky, the barn was transformed. The floor was clean, the hay stacked neatly, and the tools arranged with care. Lila stepped back, breathing heavily but with a sense of accomplishment she had not felt in a long time. The cowboy, standing a few feet away, regarded her silently, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You've got determination," he said finally. "That's something most people around here don't have." Lila's heart swelled, and though she was tired, she smiled. For the first time she realized that survival didn't mean giving up her pride. It meant using it, harnessing it, and showing the world that she had value. That morning, under the wide blue sky and the quiet watch of the cowboy, Lila took the first step toward a new life. It would not be easy, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but she had proved something vital. That courage, even in the face of fear and rejection, could open doors that seemed forever closed. And in that simple barn, with the smell of hay and earth filling her senses, Lila felt something she had almost forgotten: possibility. After the first morning of work, Lila felt a mix of exhaustion and quiet pride. Her muscles ached in ways she hadn't known before, and her hands bore small scrapes from the rough wooden beams and hay. Yet, beneath the tiredness, a spark of hope burned brightly. She had done something she hadn't dared to believe possible just a few days ago. She had offered her labor honestly and been accepted. Not only that, but the cowboy had not dismissed her or sent her away. That alone felt like a small victory in a world that often seemed determined to shut her out. The day had been hot, the sun climbing higher in the sky and casting harsh shadows across the barn floor. Sweat had dampened her hair, and her shirt stuck to her back. But Lila refused to slow down. Each sweep of the broom, each careful adjustment of hay bales became more than a task. It became proof of her worth. She worked as if the very act of labor could erase her doubts, erase the fear that she would never belong anywhere. By the time the work was done, the cowboy had retreated to a shaded area outside, tending to a few horses that grazed quietly in the field. He watched her only with his sharp eyes, saying nothing, letting her feel the weight of his observation. Lila didn't mind. In fact, it gave her a strange comfort, knowing that someone who could have turned her away had instead allowed her to prove herself. When she finally rested, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, she felt the silence of the farm settle around her. It was not the kind of silence that was empty or lonely. It was heavy, thoughtful, as if the land itself was holding its breath and waiting to see what she would do next. Lila sat on the edge of a haystack, her legs dangling, and allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of belonging. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place here. The cowboy came closer, his boots crunching on the dry dirt, and handed her a small cup of water. "Drink," he said simply. There was no warmth in his voice, yet it was not unkind. It was just matter of fact, as if acknowledging her effort was enough. Lila accepted the cup with both hands, her fingers brushing against his, and felt a strange, cautious connection. She didn't know if it was trust or respect or simply acknowledgement, but it mattered to her more than she could explain. I really appreciate the chance," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I know I'm not used to this kind of work, but I'll do my best. I promise." The cowboy nodded. "We'll see," he said. That was all. His words were few, but in them she heard an invitation to continue proving herself. He did not coddle her, nor did he underestimate her. That balance, though strict, was what she needed. Days turned into weeks, and Lila settled into a rhythm she had not known before. She rose with the sun, her body stiff from the early hours, but her spirit strengthened with each task completed. She fed the horses, cleaned the stalls, swept the barn, and carried heavy bales of hay from one side of the field to the other. At first, the work had been exhausting, even intimidating. But gradually her body adapted, and she found a strange satisfaction in her strength. She could feel herself growing capable, resilient, and most importantly, independent. The cowboy observed her quietly each day. Sometimes he would offer a correction, a better way to stack the hay, a more careful sweep of the floor, or a gentler hand when tending the horses. But mostly, he watched, assessing not just her skill, but her determination. He seemed to take a silent measure of her character, noting how she did not complain, how she did not falter under difficulty, how she insisted on giving her all even when no one praised her. It was during one of these long days that Lila first noticed something about him that surprised her. Behind the stern lines of his face and the steady, almost unreadable gaze, there was a quiet patience, a sense of fairness that few in the town seemed to possess. He did not give empty compliments or pretend that life was easier than it was. He expected work, effort, and honesty. In return, he offered trust and the chance to belong. For Lila, who had faced too many closed doors, this was a revelation. She realized that strength could take many forms, and sometimes it came not from loud words or easy smiles, but from steadfast presence and quiet judgment. Evenings at the farm were different from the bustling town. The sun would set behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, and the air would cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass. Lila would sit on the steps of the barn, her hands still dusty from work, and watch the shadows lengthen across the fields. She began to talk quietly to herself, recounting her day, reflecting on the tasks she had completed, and planning how she could improve the next day. Sometimes she would imagine her family and the home she had lost. The memories were bittersweet, but they also fueled her determination. She wanted to survive, not just for herself, but to honor the resilience she had learned from those who had come before her. One afternoon, as she was stacking hay bales higher than she had before, she stumbled slightly, the bundle threatening to topple. The cowboy's voice rang out, steady and calm, guiding her through the task. "Keep your balance. Don't rush. Control it." His instructions were simple, yet they gave her confidence. With careful steps, she righted the bale and continued, her heart pounding but her spirit strengthened. She realized that his guidance, though sparse, was rooted in experience and care. It was not indulgence, it was preparation. As the weeks passed, Lila found herself learning not only about farm work, but about resilience and the value of patience. The farm had a rhythm she had never known before, and she began to understand it in a way that felt almost natural. She knew when the horses needed attention, when the hay was ready to be moved, and when the barn required extra care. Every day brought small victories: a stack of hay perfectly aligned, a floor swept without leaving dust, a horse calmed after being startled. These victories were quiet, yet they built a foundation of confidence she had never possessed before. The townspeople began to notice her presence too. At first they were curious, observing the young woman working tirelessly on the outskirts of their quiet community. Some whispered, skeptical that she could endure such hard labor. Others, more quietly, admired her determination, though they did not always voice it. Lila paid them little mind. Her focus was not on approval, but on survival, dignity, and proving to herself that she could rise to the challenge. There were moments, of course, when fatigue and doubt crept in. She sometimes wondered if she was overreaching, if her strength would hold, if her pride would serve her or betray her. But each time she remembered her promise to herself: she would not be a burden. She would not beg. She would work, earn, and survive. That promise became a mantra, repeated silently with each task, grounding her when the weight of the day pressed down too heavily. By the end of the second week, a change was noticeable. The cowboy, who had spoken so little at first, now offered occasional nods of approval or a brief word of advice when she performed a task exceptionally well. Lila felt a quiet satisfaction in these small acknowledgments. She had earned them through sweat and effort, not pleading or charm. And in earning them, she felt a new sense of self-respect and pride. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Lila stood outside the barn, brushing the sweat from her forehead. The cowboy approached, his shadow stretching long across the dusty ground. He stopped beside her, silent for a moment, then said, "You're learning fast. Keep this up, and you'll do more than survive here."
You'll thrive. Lila's heart lifted at his words, though she hid her smile.
His praise was not extravagant, but it was genuine, and in it she heard something she had longed for, a sense that her efforts mattered, that her life could have meaning and purpose beyond struggle. She nodded, letting the words sink in. That night, as she lay on the small cot the cowboy had offered her in a modest corner of the barn, Lila thought about the days ahead. She knew the work would not get easier, that challenges would continue to come, and that the world beyond this farm would not always be kind. But she also knew something crucial. She had faced fear, asked for a chance, and proven her worth. And that knowledge, more than anything, filled her with quiet strength. The farm, the cowboy, and the work had become more than just a place to survive. They had become a classroom, teaching her lessons in patience, effort, and the value of quiet determination. And as she drifted to sleep that night, the stars visible through the open barn doors, Lila allowed herself a rare thought. Perhaps, after all the hardships, she was finally finding her place in the world. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life on the farm began to feel natural to Lila. Every sunrise brought a new set of tasks, each demanding attention and care. She had grown stronger, her muscles toned from hauling hay and caring for the animals, and her mind sharper, learning to anticipate the needs of the barn and the land. Yet even as she settled into this routine, a new challenge began to stir, a quiet, creeping tension she had not expected. It began with small things. A stack of hay might fall if she wasn't careful. A horse, normally calm, would grow restless in the heat of the afternoon. Sometimes the wind would whip through the barn, scattering loose straw across the floor, making her start again. Each of these minor difficulties was frustrating, but manageable. What made her pause, however, was the way the cowboy observed her during these moments. He did not intervene immediately. He simply watched, his sharp eyes missing nothing, waiting for her to find a solution. Lila quickly realized that this was a test, not a punishment, but a subtle push to see how she handled difficulty without hand-holding. At first it was intimidating. She would pause, take a deep breath, and wonder if she was doing it correctly. The weight of expectation pressed down on her shoulders. Every task became more than just work. It became a question. Can I rise to this challenge? Can I prove that I am capable? One particularly hot afternoon, as sweat dripped down her face and the sun burned the back of her neck, she encountered her first real setback. A stack of hay she had been carefully arranging began to topple, and she instinctively reached out to stop it. A few bales fell to the ground with a loud thump, scattering across the floor. Her heart sank. She knew the cowboy was watching, and she feared he would see this as failure. But instead of reprimanding her, he stepped forward quietly, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "Take a moment," he said calmly. "Think before you act. Work smart, not just hard." Lila nodded, swallowing the lump of frustration in her throat. She took a deep breath, stepping back to examine the fallen hay. Slowly, carefully, she began to lift each bale, stacking them with renewed attention. It took longer than she wanted, and her arms burned from the effort, but she refused to give up. By the time she finished, the stack was taller and more stable than before. The cowboy gave a small nod, his eyes sharp but approving. Lila felt a rush of quiet pride. She had learned something vital. Persistence alone was not enough. She had to combine it with thoughtfulness and care. That evening she carried water to the horses and fed them carefully, her hands steady despite the fatigue. The sun dipped low over the hills, painting the sky with deep oranges and purples. Lila paused for a moment, wiping her brow, and watched the shadows lengthen across the fields. She thought about her journey to this place, the struggles she had faced, and the fear she had carried. Somehow it all felt smaller now, more manageable. The work had become more than labor. It had become a way to understand herself, to measure her strength and patience. Even as she grew more confident, new challenges continued to arrive. One morning, a heavy storm rolled over the plains, bringing strong winds and rain that turned the dirt paths to mud. The barn roof leaked in several places, and the horses grew restless. Lila worked tirelessly, securing the hay and calming the animals. The rain poured through the cracks, soaking her clothes and weighing her down, but she pressed on. Through it all, the cowboy remained nearby, occasionally offering guidance, but mostly watching silently. She could feel his judgment, but it was tempered with an unspoken respect for her effort. It was during this storm that she first understood something important about him. The cowboy's stern exterior hid a deep care for the farm and the life it supported. He was not harsh out of cruelty, but out of necessity. His silence and restraint forced her to face challenges on her own, to learn, to adapt, and to grow. And in turn, it gave her the space to prove that she was capable, independent, and strong. Lila also began to notice changes within herself. She no longer doubted her abilities in the way she had when she first arrived. Tasks that had seemed impossible became manageable with planning and effort. She began to anticipate problems before they arose, whether it was a horse acting restless, a stack of hay leaning dangerously, or the wind threatening to scatter her work. Each problem she solved brought a new sense of accomplishment. For the first time, she felt that she was not merely surviving, she was thriving. Despite these successes, there were moments of doubt and fear. At night, when the barn was quiet and the stars glittered coldly above, she would lie awake, thinking about the future. She wondered if this life could last, if she truly belonged, or if the harshness of the world would eventually catch up with her. She missed her family and the home she had lost, and sometimes the weight of loneliness pressed heavily on her chest. Yet even in those moments, she reminded herself of the promise she had made. She would not be a burden, and she would earn her place through effort and dignity. The cowboy, observing her quietly over time, seemed to recognize her resilience. He began to trust her with more responsibility, feeding the animals on her own, checking the fences, and even preparing tools for the next day. Each new task was a small test, a chance to show that she could handle the weight of responsibility without complaint or hesitation. Lila accepted these challenges eagerly, feeling a growing sense of pride with each success. One day, while repairing a section of the fence damaged by a recent storm, she encountered a problem she had not anticipated. The wood was heavier than she expected, and the ground was soft and uneven. She struggled to lift the boards into place, her arms shaking with effort. The cowboy approached, but instead of taking over, he stood beside her quietly, offering advice only when asked. "Shift your weight.
Use your legs, not just your arms," he said calmly. Lila followed his guidance, and slowly but surely the fence began to take shape.
When the final board was secured, she stepped back, breathing heavily, but with a smile of quiet triumph. Through experiences like this, she learned that challenges were not obstacles to fear, but opportunities to grow. Each difficulty she faced on the farm was a lesson in patience, resilience, and problem-solving. And with each lesson learned, her confidence expanded. She began to see herself not as a helpless newcomer, but as someone capable of facing life head-on. Even the townspeople began to notice her growing skill. Some came by to watch her work, offering quiet nods of acknowledgement. Others whispered stories of the young woman who had arrived with nothing, refusing charity, and now worked tirelessly under the stern eye of the cowboy. While Lila paid little attention to gossip, she felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that she was proving herself through action rather than words. One afternoon, as the sun glared down and the air shimmered with heat, Lila paused in her work to catch her breath. She looked out over the fields and saw the horizon stretching endlessly, dotted with hills and the distant shapes of grazing animals. She thought about how far she had come in such a short time, from a frightened, uncertain young woman to someone capable of taking on challenges and finding solutions. She realized that her journey was not just about survival, but about discovering her own strength. And yet, despite all she had accomplished, she felt the stirrings of a deeper tension within her. She knew that more challenges lay ahead, that the path would not always be clear or easy. There would be moments when she would falter, when fear or exhaustion would threaten to pull her down. But she also knew that she had already overcome more than she thought possible. Each success had built her resilience, and each failure had taught her to adapt. By the time evening fell, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, Lila sat on the edge of the barn and allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The wind carried the smell of earth and hay, the distant sound of animals settling for the night, and the occasional creak of the barn's wooden beams. It was a world both harsh and beautiful, and she felt a deep connection to it. She had become part of the farm, and in doing so she had discovered a part of herself she had almost forgotten, a part that was strong, capable, and unyielding. The cowboy approached as she sat in quiet thought. He stood silently beside her, watching the sky for a few moments, then said simply, "You've learned more than I expected. Keep going like this, and you'll handle whatever comes next." Lila nodded, her heart lifting at the words. They were not extravagant praise, but they were enough. Enough to let her know that her effort mattered, that her courage was recognized, and that her determination had not gone unnoticed. In that quiet acknowledgement, she felt something she had longed for. Validation, yes, but also hope. Hope that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead with strength and dignity. As night fell and the stars sparkled above, Lila felt a sense of calm determination settle over her. She knew that the world would not always be easy, that obstacles would continue to rise, and that fear would sometimes find a place in her heart. But she also knew that she was ready. She had proven to herself that she could face difficulty with courage, that she could learn, adapt, and grow. And in that knowledge, she found a quiet, unshakable strength that would carry her forward into whatever lay ahead. Weeks had passed since Lila first arrived at the farm, and each day had brought new lessons and challenges. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more skilled at handling both the animals and the heavy labor of the barn. Yet, despite all her progress, she could feel a shift in the air, a subtle tension that made her heart beat a little faster each morning. The cowboy had been quiet as usual, but there was a new intensity in his gaze, a sense that something important was about to happen. Lila sensed that she was on the edge of a turning point, though she did not yet know what form it would take. One morning, the sun rose bright and clear, casting long shadows across the farm. Lila was already at work, carrying water to the horses and checking the fences, when the cowboy approached. He moved silently, his boots crunching softly on the dry dirt, and stopped a few feet away from her. Lila straightened instinctively, her hands gripping the bucket tightly. "Today," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you will take responsibility for the barn and the animals on your own. No guidance, no instructions. Just you and the work." Lila felt a mix of surprise and nervous excitement. This was more responsibility than she had ever been given at once. Her heart raced, but she reminded herself of all she had learned so far. She had faced storms, heavy loads, and the judgment of others. She could do this. She nodded, her resolve hardening. "I understand," she said. As the cowboy walked away, leaving her alone, Lila took a deep breath and began. The barn was quiet except for the soft rustle of hay and the occasional neigh of a horse. She moved through the tasks methodically, feeding and watering the animals, sweeping the floors and arranging the hay with careful precision. At first, the work seemed familiar, almost comforting, but soon, unexpected challenges began to appear. A horse, usually calm and gentle, grew restless, kicking at the stall door and snorting loudly. Lila's first instinct was to back away, but she remembered the lesson she had learned. She approached slowly, speaking softly, and reached out to steady the animal. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Slowly, the horse calmed, and she sighed in relief. This small victory gave her courage to continue. Next, she noticed a stack of hay that had been leaning precariously. One wrong move could send it toppling across the barn. She carefully adjusted the bales, stacking them securely and checking each corner to ensure stability. It took longer than she expected, and her arms ached, but she refused to rush. Every action mattered. Every careful movement was a test of patience and attention. As the morning wore on, the sun climbed higher, and the barn grew hotter. Sweat dripped down Lila's back and dust clung to her skin. Her hands were raw from lifting hay. Her muscles burned, but she did not stop. She had been alone in the barn for hours, and yet she felt a strange calm. The work had become more than labor. It had become a rhythm, a way to measure her determination and focus. It was during a brief pause that she realized the cowboy was watching. He had returned silently, standing just outside the barn door, his eyes fixed on her. Lila felt a shiver of nervousness. She was alone in her tasks, yet she could feel the weight of his observation. It was not criticism, but an expectation. He wanted to see what she could do without guidance, and she was determined not to disappoint him. As the day continued, more challenges arose. A bucket of feed tipped over, spilling grain across the floor. A horse accidentally stepped on a loose plank, causing it to wobble. Each time, Lila paused, assessed the situation, and corrected it. She moved carefully, thinking before she acted, applying every lesson the cowboy had taught her. By mid-afternoon, the barn was in perfect order, the animals calm, and the work complete. Lila stepped back, breathing heavily but with a sense of pride she had not felt before. The cowboy approached, his boots silent on the wooden floor. He studied the barn, the animals, and Lila herself. For a long moment, he said nothing. Lila held her breath, unsure if she had done enough. Then he spoke. "You did well," he said simply. "Better than I expected." Relief and joy washed over Lila. She smiled, though she tried to keep her expression calm. "Thank you," she said softly. I wanted to do my best." "You did," the cowboy replied, his voice still calm but carrying a hint of approval. "And now I want to give you something more." Lila's curiosity piqued. She followed him as he led her to the far side of the barn, where the land opened into a wide, sunlit field. "There's more work here," he explained. "The fences need repairing, the pastures need checking, and the land must be maintained. I want you to take responsibility for it. You'll have to manage your time, make decisions, and handle whatever challenges come your way. It will not be easy." Lila felt her heart race. This was more responsibility than she had ever been given, and yet she felt ready. She nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll take care of it." Over the next several days, Lila learned what it truly meant to take responsibility. She rose before sunrise, planning her tasks carefully and anticipating problems before they arose. She repaired fences, mended broken tools, and ensured the animals were fed and healthy. Each day presented unexpected challenges: a sudden storm, a stubborn animal, or a task that took longer than expected. But she faced them all with patience and resolve. The cowboy continued to watch, sometimes offering advice, but mostly allowing her to find solutions on her own. Lila began to understand why he had been so strict in his expectations. By giving her responsibility without constant guidance, he was helping her grow stronger, more capable, and more confident. Every challenge she faced was a test of skill, judgment, and courage. One afternoon, while checking a fence near the edge of the property, Lila noticed signs of a small storm approaching. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind began to pick up. The horses in the pasture were restless, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Lila did not panic. She had learned to anticipate problems and act quickly. She secured the animals, reinforced the fence, and moved hay and equipment to safer areas. By the time the storm hit in full force, everything was protected, and the animals were calm. She stood in the rain, her clothes soaked, feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride. That evening, the cowboy approached her once more. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "You handled today well," he said. "Better than many would have. You're learning what it means to take responsibility." Lila felt a warmth in her chest. His words were not exaggerated praise, but they carried meaning. She realized that the turning point she had sensed was not a single event, but a series of moments where she had proven herself capable. She had faced challenges, made decisions, and learned from mistakes. And through it all, she had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. The days that followed continued to test her, but Lila no longer feared the challenges. She approached each task with careful thought, determination, and resilience. She began to take pride not only in completing the work, but in the skill and judgment she applied. She understood that responsibility was not a burden, but a chance to grow, to prove herself, and to make a meaningful contribution to the farm and the life she was building. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Lila stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the animals settle for the night. She felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had faced challenges, proven her courage, and learned the value of responsibility, and she knew that whatever came next, she would be ready. In that moment, the cowboy approached quietly and stood beside her. He did not speak immediately, allowing her to savor the peace of the evening. Finally, he said, "You've come far. Keep going like this, and there's nothing you cannot handle." Lila smiled, her heart full. She understood now that the true turning point had not been a single task or day, but the series of choices, efforts, and lessons that had led her here. She had learned to face difficulty with courage, to act with patience, and to take responsibility without fear. And in doing so, she had discovered a strength within herself that she had never known. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Lila felt a sense of calm determination settle over her. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had arrived at the farm weeks ago. She had proven to herself that she was capable, resilient, and strong. And she knew that this newfound strength would carry her through whatever challenges awaited, allowing her to face the future with courage, wisdom, and pride. The weeks on the farm had transformed Lila in ways she had never imagined possible. She was no longer the uncertain, timid young woman who had approached the cowboy's barn, afraid of rejection and ashamed of needing help. She had grown stronger, more capable, and more confident, not just in her body, but in her mind and spirit. She could carry heavy loads, handle the most stubborn animals, and organize the barn with skill. But more than that, she had learned patience, perseverance, and the quiet strength that comes from taking responsibility and meeting challenges head-on. As she rose with the sun one morning, the soft golden light spilling across the fields, Lila felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The barn was clean, the animals fed and watered, and the fences secure. She had already completed the first round of tasks for the day, and yet a sense of excitement stirred in her chest. Today felt different. She could feel the shift in the air, the knowledge that her journey on the farm had reached a new stage. The cowboy appeared at the barn door, his silhouette sharp against the morning light. He studied Lila quietly, his expression calm but intense. "You've done well," he said, simply. His words were not extravagant praise, but they carried weight. In them she could hear recognition of her effort, acknowledgement of her courage, and respect for her perseverance. "But today," he continued, "I want you to take charge of everything on your own. You will make decisions, solve problems, and manage the day as you see fit. I will not interfere unless it is absolutely necessary." Lila nodded, her heart racing. She felt both nervous and excited. This was the culmination of everything she had learned so far, the true test of her ability, judgment, and determination. She took a deep breath, recalling the lessons the cowboy had taught her: patience, observation, planning, and courage. Today she would show that she could apply them all. The morning passed quickly as she moved through the farm with quiet focus. She fed the animals, repaired fences, and checked the condition of the barns. She noticed a small problem with the water trough. One of the supports had begun to weaken. Carefully, she reinforced it, using tools and materials she had learned to handle. Each action felt deliberate and confident, a reflection of the strength she had built over the past weeks. By mid-afternoon, a minor challenge arose. One of the horses, usually calm, became startled by a sudden noise from the woods. It reared up, kicking and snorting, and Lila felt a moment of panic. But she remembered everything she had learned. Stay calm, assess the situation, act with confidence. She approached the horse slowly, speaking softly, and placing her hands gently on its neck. Gradually, the animal calmed, and Lila breathed a sigh of relief. She realized in that moment that she had gained not only skill, but courage, the ability to face fear without being paralyzed by it. Later in the day, as she was checking the fences near the edge of the property, Lila encountered another challenge. A section of the fence had been damaged by a fallen branch during a recent storm. The wood was heavy, and the ground was uneven, making the repair difficult. For a moment she hesitated, considering whether to wait for the cowboy's guidance, but she quickly shook off the doubt. She had faced similar challenges before, and she knew she could solve this one. Using careful planning, strength, and patience, she lifted the wood into place and secured it with nails. When the task was done, she stepped back, proud of what she had accomplished entirely on her own. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and purple, the cowboy approached. He walked silently across the yard, his eyes observing the farm, the animals, and finally, Lila herself. For a long moment he said nothing. Lila's heart raced. She had given her all today, applying every lesson she had learned, and yet she could feel the weight of his judgment. Finally he spoke. "You've done more than I expected," he said. "You've managed everything on your own, handled unexpected challenges, and taken responsibility without hesitation. You've proven that you are capable, reliable, and strong." Relief, pride, and joy flooded through Lila. She smiled, her hands still dusty from the day's work, her muscles aching but her spirit soaring. "Thank you," she said softly. I've learned so much, and I'm grateful for the chance." The cowboy nodded, his expression calm but with a hint of warmth. "You've earned more than just a chance," he said. "You've earned respect and trust. You've shown that courage, determination, and responsibility are more important than skill alone. You've grown, and that growth is what truly matters." For the first time, Lila felt a deep sense of accomplishment that went beyond completing tasks or surviving. She had transformed herself through effort, patience, and courage. She realized that the journey on the farm had taught her more than work. It had taught her about life, about her own strength, and about the power of perseverance. That evening, as the stars began to twinkle above and the animals settled for the night, Lila stood outside the barn, looking over the fields. She felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. The farm, the work, and the cowboy's guidance had shaped her into someone capable, confident, and self-reliant. She had proven to herself that she could face challenges, overcome fear, and earn her place through effort and determination. In the days that followed, life on the farm continued, but the dynamic between Lila and the cowboy shifted subtly. He spoke more often, offering guidance when necessary, but also allowing her the space to make decisions and take initiative. He no longer needed to test her constantly, for he had seen her strength, skill, and judgment. Lila, in turn, worked with quiet confidence, knowing that she had earned not only her place on the farm, but also the respect of someone she admired. The townspeople who had once watched her with curiosity and skepticism began to notice the change as well. They saw a young woman who had arrived with nothing, refusing charity, and now handled demanding work with skill and calm determination. Some nodded quietly as they passed, offering small gestures of acknowledgement. Others whispered stories of her courage and perseverance. Lila paid little attention to their words, for she knew that her journey was not about recognition. It was about proving to herself that she could face life with strength and dignity. One afternoon, as she rested by the edge of the barn, the cowboy approached and handed her a small bundle of tools he had repaired and sharpened. "These are for you," he said. "Use them wisely and continue to build your skill. You've earned them." Lila's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I'll take care of them, and I'll keep learning." "You already have," the cowboy replied, his voice steady. "But growth never stops. Remember that." In that moment, Lila understood the full meaning of her journey. The work, the challenges, the responsibilities. They had not just been about surviving. They had been about discovering her own strength, proving her courage, and learning the value of perseverance. She had grown in ways that no one could take away, and she knew that she was ready for whatever the future might hold. The days that followed were filled with the same rhythm of work and learning, but Lila no longer felt fear or doubt. She approached each task with careful thought, determination, and confidence. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she had the tools, both physical and mental, to face them. She had earned her place, not by asking for help, but by proving her worth through action, effort, and courage. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the sky turned shades of deep orange and violet, Lila stood at the edge of the field, watching the animals settle for the night. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and pride. She had faced fear, worked tirelessly, and overcome challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. She had learned patience, responsibility, and the strength that comes from perseverance. And she knew that, no matter what came next, she would be ready. The cowboy joined her silently, standing for a moment as they watched the stars appear in the sky. Finally, he said, "You've done more than survive here. You've grown. That is something no one can take from you. Keep this strength with you, and it will carry you through life." Lila smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart she had not felt in a long time. "I will," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." In that quiet, starlit moment, she realized that her journey had been about more than work, more than survival. It had been about discovering herself, proving her courage, and finding her place in a world that had once seemed so uncertain. She had learned that strength was not just physical. It was patience, resilience, and the courage to face challenges head-on. And she knew, with quiet certainty, that she was ready for whatever the future might bring. As she returned to the barn, the soft glow of lanterns guiding her steps, Lila felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The farm had become more than a place to survive. It had become a place to grow, learn, and thrive. And she had learned that no matter how difficult life might be, courage, perseverance, and determination could open doors to a future she had once thought impossible. Word count, approximately 1310. Written in simple English. Fully engaging, safe, and immersive. Provides a satisfying resolution and lesson learned. If you want, I can now combine all 5 parts into a polished full story, making it a seamless narrative ready to read like a true life inspirational story. Do you want me to do that? Part 5. Expand K-row without heading. 1,300 words, my in simple English words. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. And don't use any violated word. Aviat any violated content. Absolutely. Here's a new, fully expanded Part 5 around 1,300 words, written in simple, engaging English, safe for all audiences, and bringing the story to a satisfying resolution. The farm had grown quiet as the sun began its slow descent behind the hills, casting long, golden shadows across the fields. Lila stood near the barn, her hands still dusty from the day's work, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of fresh hay, damp earth, and the faint scent of the horses that grazed peacefully nearby. For a moment, she let herself simply feel the stillness, the calm that came after a day of hard labor. She thought about how far she had come since the first day she had nervously approached this farm, begging to work. Back then, fear had driven her steps, and doubt had filled her heart. Now she felt something entirely different, a quiet confidence that had been built through effort, perseverance, and courage. The cowboy appeared at the edge of the barn, his tall frame outlined by the setting sun. Lila noticed the way his eyes lingered on the farm, scanning the fields, the animals, and the barn itself. There was a weight to his gaze, one that seemed to measure not just the state of the farm, but the growth of the person standing there. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Lila felt a flutter of nervousness. Even after weeks together, his silence carried the same tension it had on her first day. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and calm. "You've done well," he said. "Better than I expected. You've taken responsibility, faced challenges without hesitation, and handled every task I've given you." Lila felt a warmth rise in her chest. She had worked hard, yes, but hearing acknowledgement from the cowboy, the man whose judgment she had feared most, filled her with pride and relief. "Thank you," she said softly, keeping her voice steady despite the flutter of emotions. "I've learned so much, and I'm grateful for the chance you gave me." The cowboy nodded slowly, and for a moment, Lila thought she saw a trace of a smile in the corner of his mouth. "It's not just about the work," he said. "It's about how you face difficulty. how you adapt, and how you grow. That is what truly matters. You've proven that you are capable, responsible, and strong. That is something no one can take from you. Lila let the words sink in. It was true. She had learned more than how to sweep a barn, feed animals, or stack hay. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own strength, and to keep going, even when the day was hard, the sun was hot, or the storms threatened to overwhelm her. She realized that these lessons would stay with her for the rest of her life, far beyond the farm and the fields where she had earned them. As the evening deepened, the cowboy led her to a small shed at the back of the barn. Inside, he had arranged a collection of tools, cleaned and sharpened. "These are for you," he said. "Use them well, take care of them, and continue to grow your skills." Lila's eyes widened. The gift was practical, but it also felt symbolic. It was not just a tool for work. It was recognition of her growth, her resilience, and her ability to take responsibility for herself and the world around her.
Thank you, Lila said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. She held the tools carefully, feeling their weight in her hands.
They were a reminder of the hard work, the lessons learned, and the courage she had found within herself. Over the next few days, life on the farm settled into a new rhythm. Lila moved with quiet confidence, managing her tasks efficiently and thoughtfully. She began to anticipate problems before they arose, adjusting fences, caring for the animals, and maintaining the barns with careful precision. The cowboy continued to watch, but now he spoke less, offering guidance only when necessary. The dynamic had shifted. Lila was no longer a student under test, but a capable partner in the work of the farm. One morning, as she was carrying hay to the far pasture, a sudden gust of wind caught her by surprise, sending a pile of loose hay scattering across the ground. Her heart raced, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She bent to pick up the pieces, stacking them carefully and securing the larger bales. By the time the cowboy arrived, she had the situation under control. He watched silently for a moment, then gave a small nod of approval. Lila felt a quiet thrill of satisfaction. She had handled the sudden challenge without fear, using the lessons she had learned over weeks of hard work. The days continued with small tests and unexpected difficulties. A broken fence post needed replacing, a horse became sick, and a sudden summer storm left the ground muddy and slippery. Each time, Lila faced the problem head-on. She assessed the situation, planned her actions, and executed them carefully, never rushing and never panicking. With each success, her confidence grew. She no longer feared the unknown. She met it with patience and courage. Through all this, she began to reflect on her journey. She remembered the first day she had approached the cowboy's barn, trembling and ashamed, asking only for a chance to prove herself. She had feared rejection, humiliation, and failure. And yet here she was, weeks later, managing the farm, earning respect, and discovering a strength she had never known existed within her. The lessons she had learned were not just about work. They were about life, courage, and resilience. She realized that true strength came from perseverance, humility, and the willingness to face difficulty with determination and honesty. One evening, after the day's work was done, Lila sat on the edge of the barn steps and watched the sky turn deep shades of purple and orange. The animals were settled, the barn clean, and the fields calm. She felt a sense of peace that she had not known in years. The farm had become more than a place to work or survive. It had become a place to grow, to learn, and to discover the person she could be when she embraced challenge rather than fear. The cowboy joined her, standing silently beside her for a few moments. The stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling faintly against the darkening horizon. Finally, he spoke. You've come far, he said. You've learned more than most people do in a lifetime. You've proven that courage, effort, and determination matter more than luck or comfort. That is something rare, and you should never forget it. Lila looked at him and nodded, a quiet smile on her face.
I won't forget, she said. I've learned so much, and I feel stronger than I ever imagined.
She paused, reflecting on all the hard mornings, the heavy lifting, the storms, the setbacks, and the lessons. I know now that I can face anything. I can handle challenges, take responsibility, and keep going no matter how hard it gets. The cowboy studied her for a moment, then gave a small, approving nod. Good, he said simply, because life will always test you, but strength like yours will carry you through.
Lila felt a sense of pride that was calm, steady, and enduring.
It was not the pride of boasting or showing off, but the quiet pride of someone who had faced fear, worked tirelessly, and learned to believe in herself. She realized that the farm had given her more than survival. It had given her a foundation for life, a sense of purpose, and confidence that she could rely on herself no matter what came next. The days and weeks that followed were filled with the same rhythm of work and learning, but now Lila faced them with quiet confidence. She moved through her tasks with ease, knowing that she had earned her place on the farm and proven her abilities. She no longer feared failure or the judgment of others. Instead, she approached life with patience, determination, and courage, ready to meet whatever challenges came her way. And yet, even as she thrived, she never forgot the lessons of humility and perseverance. She understood that growth was a continuous journey, and that strength was not simply about physical skill, but about patience, careful thought, and the courage to face uncertainty without hesitation. She carried these lessons in her heart, knowing that they would serve her long after the farm and the barn were behind her. One evening, as the sun sank low over the hills, Lila stood at the edge of the field and looked out over the land she had helped care for. The animals grazed quietly, the barn stood sturdy and neat, and the wind carried the familiar scents of hay, earth, and animals. She felt a sense of fulfillment and peace that she had never known. She had faced fear, embraced responsibility, and discovered the strength within herself to endure and thrive. And in that moment, she realized something essential. The farm had not only given her work, but it had given her herself. The cowboy joined her silently, standing for a long moment as they both looked out over the fields. Finally, he spoke. "You've done more than survive here. You've grown. That is something no one can take from you. Keep this strength with you, and it will carry you through life." Lila smiled, feeling the weight of the words settle into her heart. "I will," she said softly. "I will carry it, always." As the stars began to glitter above, Lila felt a sense of completion, of balance, and of hope. She had begun her journey afraid, unsure, and in need. She ended it confident, capable, and strong. The farm had been more than a place of work. It had been a place of learning, growth, and transformation. She had proven to herself that courage, patience, and perseverance could overcome fear and uncertainty. And with that knowledge, she was ready to face whatever the future might bring, carrying with her the lessons of the barn, the animals, and the quiet wisdom of the cowboy who had trusted her when she most needed it.